Thank you for joining us to learn more about the Climate Ready Housing funding opportunity. We really appreciate all of your interest and hope to answer as many of your questions as we can. And just so you know how best to take advantage of this opportunity for one of your upcoming projects. So by way of introduction, my name is Joe De La Rose. I am the Program Officer for Green Homes at LISC Massachusetts, and I want to pass it to my co-presenters, Eamon and Deepti, to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Deepti Kama. I'm use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Sustainability Program Manager at MHP.
Welcome everybody. Eamon Bensavango, Smart Growth Program Manager at MHP, and I use he, him pronouns. Thanks.
Thank you both. And I think I forgot to note my pronouns, but I use he series pronouns as well. So before we get into depth on the program, I just want to remind everyone that the session is being recorded. Our recording and slides will be posted to LISC's Climate Ready Housing Program webpage after today. So if one of your colleagues or a partner of yours wasn't able to join the webinar, you'll be able to share the presentation materials after the fact. And as we go through the presentation, we'd love to invite you to type in any questions you might have using the Q&A function, which should be on the bottom right of your Zoom screen. For the sake of time, because we have a good amount of information to get through, we'll be responding to all questions at the end of the presentation. And I also want to note that we created a frequently asked questions document that is also on our program website. And this may already have some of the answers to some of the questions you're coming with. But as we receive more of these questions from you today or in the coming days and weeks, we'll be updating that document. So with that, we'll get into the presentation. So just an overview of what we'll be covering today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the team behind the scenes of the Climate Ready Housing Program. We'll give an overview of the program, its characteristics, different eligibility requirements, and different pathways to application. Some of the key documents that are required for submission. We'll give an overview of the different steps in our Climate Ready Housing timeline, specific to 2026. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So as I mentioned, feel free to put any Q&A that come up in the Q&A function of Zoom, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So you've already met myself, Eamon, and Deepti, but this page gives you an overview of the folks who are working behind the scenes on the Climate Ready Housing program. I want to acknowledge Emily, my colleague at LISC, Lauren, who along with Eamon and Deepti represents the MHP team, and Chris Burns and Tommy Burns from the MassHousing team. Going forward, I remain your day-to-day contact for most things Climate Ready Housing, but these are the folks who are supporting all of that behind the scenes with ongoing planning. I won't spend too much time on this slide, but this is just an illustration of the fact that this program is a joint effort of these three teams, LISC Massachusetts, MHP, and MassHousing, and reflects our complementary experience and expertise to administer this program on behalf of the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, who are ultimately the holders and the final awarders of this funding. want to give you a little bit of an overview of the Climate Ready Housing Program. This may be familiar to those of you who've been following this for the last few years, but the Climate Ready Housing started as a smaller funding program, which was seeded with state funds through the 2021 Economic Bond Bill. With the passage of the Affordable Homes Act in 2024, our program's funding capacity was multiplied tenfold, which allowed us to support many more projects than before. So now we are at an annual funding capacity of $16.5 million. And with this greater funding capacity, our program has also wanted to support different types of projects, depending on their needs and funding life cycles or stage in their funding life cycle. So beyond the all at once deep energy retrofit approach that we have historically offered as our pathway to funding. This supposes a more comprehensive scope of work. We created a second pathway to apply for climate ready housing funding called Zero Over Time. We will get into more of this in detail, but this pathway just gives another option for projects that are looking to make more mid-cycle, moderate energy renovations upfront. So yes, we're going to get into the details of all of this, and for now, I'm going to hand it over to Eamon to continue the program overview.
Thanks, Joe. So the Climate Ready Housing Program, it's an annual decarbonization funding program for existing multifamily affordable housing projects, projects that are pursuing a comprehensive energy retrofit, or as Joe was alluding to, a more moderate mid-cycle energy renovation. I'll stress that this is not for new construction projects, but for existing, so rehab or adaptive reuse projects. And since the 2024 Affordable Homes Act, the program now has $16 million available, and that allows us to award 10 to 15 projects with climate ready housing funds. And the amounts can range depending on size, importantly, the energy scope, and some other factors as well. And these funding awards are typically provided as a 30-year zero interest deferred payment loan. For projects that are awarded less than $500,000, there is a way for us to structure that award as an unsecured loan. And that would be something that the Climate Ready Housing team would work with any development team to work through those particulars. Next slide, Joe. So the program overview. So eligibility is based on two important factors. Since climate ready housing is a MassDocs funding source, there is an income restriction with the funds, and that restriction requires that at least 25% of the occupants in a project have incomes that are at or below 60% AMI. And this will be further outlined in any award letter that states that the affordability requirement must be at least 30 years. There's also the energy component, as you could imagine, for the program. So all applications must have energy design solutions, and these can include a variety of things. It can be a selection or a combination of envelope insulation, heat pump technology, a plan for total electrification of domestic hot water or appliances, for instance, and a maximization of any renewable energy systems, just to name a few. There's a few others that are outlined here on the slide for you. Also to note, we're also requesting that applicants demonstrate two additional components in their application. First being that the proposed project scope does not create any new financial burden to existing residents, for instance, through increased utility bills. And secondly, that any projects that have noted climate risks are addressing those risks through resilience and adaptation in their scope that are outlined in their climate ready application. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Simon. I'll take a few minutes now to go a little bit more in depth into the two application pathways we have within the program. The first being a deep energy retrofit, or a DER, which is a comprehensive whole building approach that maximizes energy efficiency and reduces carbon emissions in an all-at-once scope of work. So within a DER, we are looking for an energy use intensity reduction of at least 50% before taking into account any on-site renewable energy. And the scope of work generally includes extensive building envelope improvements to target reductions in energy load, as well as electrification of HVAC and mechanical systems and ventilation improvements to ensure proper indoor air quality. And ideal DER candidates are projects that are already scheduled for major rehab scope of work that includes windows and roof and windows replacement, sidings, and mechanical systems replacements. So these are projects that are pretty extensive in scope and also generally well along in the development process. And the second pathway is less prescriptive. This is the zero overtime approach. So while a lot of the strategies for decarbonization and climate resiliency are shared between a DER and a zero COT project, the primary difference between the two is in the timeline of the proposed work of the interventions and improvements. So for a ZOT project, there may be more moderate energy efficiency improvements that are immediately addressed, leaving other aspects such as electrification or roof replacement to be held off until those current structures reach the end of their useful life. This ensures an efficient and thoughtful strategy that ties decarbonization upgrades to the building's anticipated maintenance lifecycle systems, which can prove to be cost-effective while committing the building to rigorous emissions reductions. And we are anticipating that these properties reach zero carbon emissions by 2050. An example of a ZOT scope of work that we've recently funded is a public housing authority project that elected to pursue upfront insulation and mechanical ventilation improvements through ERVs in order to pave the path for future electrification. The project also included roof reinforcements for solar readiness, leaving installations of solar panels to a later time. CRH projects can be requested, CRH funds can be requested for funding specific measures that are to be implemented in the near term in accordance with the ZOT plan that is set. And due to the relative flexibility of a ZOT scope in comparison to a DER project, there may be specific requests that are smaller than $500,000. And in that case, we have a streamlined pathway in which the money functions as an unsecured loan, which expedites closing and release of funds as needed. Next slide, please, Joe. Moving on now to the key deliverables we're asking for in the application process. Our pre-application is now open. It's been linked in the presentation, and you can also access it on LISC's landing page website. This is a process similar to One Stop, in which we will review all of the pre-applications and then invite a selected group of projects to submit the full application. I'll talk a little bit more about the decarbonization assessment in the next slide, so we'll hold off on that one for now. But the remaining points here are covered if you provide a one-stop as part of your application. But if otherwise unable to, we are looking for you to provide an affordability schedule, a sources of uses, an operating pro forma, as well as financials for the property and sponsor entity. Next slide, please, Joe. So a little bit more color on the decarbonization assessment part of the application. This is another part that requires some distinction between a DER and a ZOT project. So for a DER, we are looking for a full decarbonization assessment that often follows within the parameters of an ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit. So this should also include a baseline total energy use intensity reporting, a proposed scope of measures tied to projected reduction in EUI and related costs, as well as a breakdown of the existing and projected carbon emissions. I will note here as a special condition that adaptive reuse projects do not need to provide the baseline for the energy use intensity, as there may be none. For a ZOT project, again, it's a similar format to the decarbonization assessment, but it should also include the complete ZOT strategy that sequences the various energy and resiliency interventions and improvements over time. The phased out measures should have a breakdown of the related carbon emission reduction, as well as show that the project is going to achieve zero operating carbon emissions by 2050. I will also note here that a capital needs assessment or a property conditions assessment that specifically addresses decarbonization strategy would also be sufficient for this part of the application. And with that, I'll hand it over to Joe.
Thanks, Deepti. Wrapping up, we're making good time. Just to take you through what to expect in the next few months, the timeline for the Climate Ready Housing Program's 2026 round. Our pre-applications are now open. You can access those through our program website. And these will be open for the next 3.5 weeks and will be due by April 10th. After the review of our pre-applications, applicants that are approved to submit a full application will be invited to do so by May 1st, 2026, which is when our full application cycle opens. So we'll be reviewing pre-applications first and then communicating with everybody who submitted about a pre-application about whether they've been invited to move forward to the final stage or not. And then from then on, final applicants will have the month of May to submit their full applications. And our review committee will review those final applications according to some of the scoring criteria that is listed in the NOFA, and that we can go over a little bit in the Q&A, and then score them and provide UHLC with a list of recommendations for funding. After review from UHLC and some back and forth with our team, we typically expect to be able to announce the list of awardees sometime in the fall after the summer. So with that, I am going to invite in, if I can, some of the rest of our admin team to panelists, and we'll move into Q&A. Just give me a minute. I believe we're all here. So it's going to go through the Q&A. All right. So starting at the top of our Q&A, Ken asked, will continued use of fossil fuels as a complement, such as a complement to electric equipment, be supported if it can be demonstrated that this results in lower operational carbon emissions. So I can start, and then for each of these questions, I'll invite the rest of my admin team to complement or add. But I would say that we're not penalizing projects that are we don't intend to penalize projects that are showing continued use of some fossil fuel systems, such as domestic hot water systems or systems that may have useful life. We will, as part of our full application, be asking folks to provide a pathway to full electrification to at least talk about what their pathway might be if that is not demonstrated in their approach. But yeah, I'll invite others to add from the admin team.
Yeah, I would just add that this might be especially relevant for zero overtime projects, in that sometimes you see zero overtime projects where a hybrid strategy of deploying electrified heating systems as well as using existing backup fossil fuel systems is deployed to, especially within the context of reducing operating cost implications, which is obviously a concern that we have and something we'd be looking at as part of the applications as well.
Thanks, Lauren. Great. Moving on to the next question in the list. Does this mean that the project does not need to include all of the energy design solutions in their scope, some but not all? So this is referring to the slide where we had the different potential improvements. Yes, so for the DER pathway, we expect a more comprehensive energy project that would include a combination of some of the measures that we described or that we listed, really with a performance-based target. So we're looking at energy use intensity reduction. And that may involve, any number of combinations of these items that should be, proposed in the scope and corroborated by the decarbonization assessment that will be provided as an attachment. And then to note, as Lauren did, that zero overtime projects may be differently affected by this. So there, we're looking at a different type of scope, projects that are a different point in their financial life cycle that may not be anticipating as significant of an energy scope up front. So they might propose, as it in the example that Deepti gave, something that's more insulation focused with some ventilation components or electrification upgrades, or sorry, electrical service upgrades to support future electrification of systems. But yeah, less focused on that comprehensive approach. Does anybody else want to add from the admin team?
It may be helpful for folks to take a look at the actual application template where project teams are asked to submit the measures that they're asking for funding for, because it does very clearly indicate there which measures are part of the application that you're requesting for funding for from Climate Ready Housing versus measures that you anticipate applying further down the road. So it gets to that point of being very clear and explicit about what you are asking for funding for under this round versus what are measures that you plan to implement in the future.
Next question, also from Ken. With implementation of ERE ventilation at a building with no or not adequate mechanical ventilation, what is the baseline for the purpose of savings calculations estimates? I might kick this to someone on the team.
Good point, because most of the time, ventilation improvements actually potentially increase the energy load of a property, but do so for the purpose of improving indoor air quality. So I think that that's one. Ken, let us think on that one a little bit, and we'll provide you some very specific guidance and feedback in the FAQ about how to navigate that. We obviously, when we review applications, will do so with a lens around that measure being something that increases energy use, but for very good reason. So it's already sort of incorporated into how we sort of evaluate the projects, but we'll provide more information if there should be a different way of calculating the baseline.
Next question. Is 50% reduction in energy from baseline pre-solar a requirement, or is it preferred? Will projects with 50% reduction be prioritized? And how is there a scoring matrix and criteria? So it sounds like two questions. For the first one, again, we're talking about this funding opportunity through two pathways. So the two different pathways may have different approaches to this, but certainly for the deep energy retrofit projects, we certainly expect a more comprehensive energy project, as I mentioned previously. And so that is where that 50% target becomes more hard, where we look for reaching something along those lines. I think I can also grab in Tiffany's question afterwards about any exceptions to that. There may be buildings that have that may have different constraints. In Tiffany's question, there's buildings with historic designations. So there may be some exceptions, but in any case, for the deep energy retrofit pathway, that is kind of the expectation. I think I'll stop there and see if anybody else from the admin team wants to add, and then we can get to the scoring matrix. Okay. Hearing none. And so for the second part of that question, is there a scoring matrix criteria? So we have an updated set of scoring criteria that are provided in the NOFA on our website. So we would suggest that you take a look at that. As for scoring associated with that criteria, we're in the process of updating that. And that will be ready by the final application stage, if not before. And this scoring criteria will be relevant only to projects that are invited to that final stage. But you can certainly get a sense of them already by looking at the NOFA. Kristen asks, would a multi-building project that is a combination of adaptive reuse of an existing building and a separate new construction building be eligible for this program, provided that funds are used only for the scope of the adaptive reuse? So I can give this one a stab. So as we expressed earlier in the presentation, this is again a program that is focused on existing projects, projects that propose to renovate or alter an existing structure. So new construction projects cannot be eligible. In this particular case, an adaptive reuse project that would be eligible for the program, knowing that we would just need to have conversations to make sure that any funding that is awarded is not in any way being used as part of the scope of the new construction project. That is my answer. Another question from Ken. Are essential prerequisite measures such as hazardous material mitigation, structural repairs, health and safety sanitation measures, etc., eligible in either the zero over time or DER pathways? I think I'd like to see if the admin team has anything, but I think that the main scope items that our program is meant to fund are energy reduction measures and electrification measures. Yeah, I don't know if anybody on the team would like to add.
Yeah, Joe, I can jump in. So I think as far as barrier mitigation is required to be able to implement those energy efficiency and decarbonization measures, we would consider them eligible.
Thanks, Lauren. You mentioned that an adaptive reuse project does not need to provide a building energy use intensity baseline, which means an EUI reduction does not need to be calculated. How do you know then whether it qualifies as a DER project or not? That's a good question from Mark Newey. Our recommendations are yes, or like what we're looking for in applications are slightly modified with adaptive reuse projects, given the fact that they might start as a non-multifamily residential use, and the proposed project is purporting to change that use to be multifamily residential. I think we I would say we have target EUI levels that are on our website. That is a range that we would like folks to try to target in their projects. I think, yeah. Anything else to add from the admin team?
Jump in, Joe. I do think for kind of adaptive projects, we're focused more on the proposed scope of like the narrative, and kind of making our decision from that rather than, yet to your point, like a reduction in EUIs if there's no baseline. And I do want to add the kind of nuance that there will be kind of additional factors that we consider too if this is a historical adaptive reuse, because there's more considerations there. So we do have some kind of nuance in how we're looking at adaptive reuse and historical rehab.
I would just add that in past funding rounds, the adaptive reuse projects that have been competitive and awarded funds have been comprehensive in nature in terms of their energy approach, really comprehensive insulation strategies, electrification of mechanical systems, really good air sealing. So, given that there generally are opportunities in all of these different measures with an adaptive reuse building, we really are looking for teams that are really pushing that work.
All right, next question from Patricia Flaherty. We have a project recently submitted one-stop question on the baseline for the decarbonization assessment. This project was formerly a market rate multifamily project that we are taking ownership of as a vacant property. We do not necessarily have access to existing energy use. How should we handle this? Um, I'm not sure. Lauren, do you have a thought on
Great question. Yeah, I think let us think on that one as well and get back to you with how to approach it, in any circumstances where you are able to get some level of historic information, especially if the use was multifamily previously, then that's how we would recommend doing it. But if you really truly have no access to historic information around the property, then I think we'll probably have to come up with a different strategy there.
Great, excellent. Uh, Reese asks, what should applicants do if they have not assembled a full project team by the time the full application is due? My recollection from our past rounds is that we don't necessarily need a full team to be assembled by the full application. I think that in the past we've had projects that have come in without a general contractor identified. I think we typically expect there to be a certain amount of design work that would have been done, or at least some iteration, um, and and certainly the decarbonization assessment as a key application material should be provided. So that suggests at least having a building science consultant that I would suspect would be working with an architecture team. Does anybody else want to comment on that from the admin team?
I would just say if they worked with a contractor for pre-construction services, but they're not really selected as the project contractor, that's worth noting.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. Um, Elizabeth Malloy asks, can you describe the criteria used to evaluate the pre-applications? And then how much of a factor is readiness? I think on the first one, I would say the when we have the pre-applications that are coming in, we're typically looking for the basic eligibility criteria that we have mentioned, the affordability, the energy use intensity reduction proposed, and then some of the other things like resiliency and any cost burden to tenants as sort of more of gating mechanisms, and also just simply for the submittal of all required application materials. I think those are sort of the things that we're looking at the front end. Um, and as for readiness, I think we try to be flexible there with knowledge that some projects are much closer to being ready, um, shovel ready with other sources identified or at different stages in their pre-development, while others may need some early in funding. So I think we've tried to be flexible with that in the past and offer climate ready housing as a potential solution for both of those avenues, for both of those situations. Anything to add, admin team? I'm just going to keep saying that. I'm sorry that that's repetitive. Great. Question about restriction against increasing costs for residents. Does this extend to costs for building owners, the house meter, I asked because a switch to electric can increase utility costs. Yeah, so good question, Ken. I think from a high level, the intent with that restriction is to make sure that residents of the project in question are not adversely affected by any of the energy scope or the electrification. And so we're usually looking for proposers or applicants to show that there's no increase to tenant costs, meaning rent plus utilities as a result of the project. Knowing that if there are some situations where we've had cases where there are applicants who are paying entirely for the utilities at the property, so their tenants are not concerned by utility costs. But in other cases, tenants are paying, for heat or for plug load or something like that. And in those cases, we've just asked how applicants are mitigating those potential increases to costs, whether that be through, adjustments to utility allowances or other things. Anyone else want to add here?
Yeah, Joe, I would add that, from an owner perspective, we want to make sure that these improvements to the building are not resulting in problematic increases in operating costs that may affect the financial viability of the project moving forward as well. So while there isn't the same sort of threshold issue around increased operating costs, we need to feel very confident that the project has the ability to absorb any sort of increased operating cost without significant hardship.
Thanks. Joseph says, after Friday, April 10th, the pre-app due date, by what time should the applicant get feedback on the pre-application to allow for readiness to the month of May application submission? It's a good question. I think that we typically try to have, all invitations to the final application stage a few weeks after the due date, certainly before May 1st. But yeah, I would say between April 10th and May 1st, knowing that the full month of May is allotted for the full application stage. Gary asks, if we already have the decarbonization study in hand, this already has the estimated costs for decarbonization measures to be included with the application. How detailed does the application need to be in terms of getting specifications or bids? I think this is from potentially a public housing authority perspective, or the way that this works within facilities management. We first find our funding before engineering, bidding, contractor selection projects. How detailed are your requirements? Does anybody on the admin team want to take a stab at that? Or maybe we can, go ahead, Lauren.
Joe, I would just say that this sort of relates to your question that you answered earlier about sort of readiness, and that we are going to see certain project teams that are well along in their design process and may have much more detailed and specific bids for the project work, whereas those who may, to your point, just have finished their decarbonization study and have a much more sort of schematic sense of the scope of work as well as the pricing on the project, may have less specificity around that. So I think we will evaluate that information within the context of the stage of the project.
Great reminder, Lauren. Thank you. We have a question about the validity of embodied carbon impact mitigation. What are some examples of measures you've seen in successful applications? So that's a really good question. We've had a variety of approaches to embodied carbon mitigation. Some look at it more from a product perspective. So for example, using products like wood fiber insulation as a specific type of insulation that has carbon sequestering qualities or embodied carbon impact reduction. Those are some specific that would be an example of a specific measure. In some projects we've seen go all out and create an embodied carbon mitigation analysis. We don't expect all all applicants to provide that level of detail. That's a pretty detailed deliverable. But if folks are so inclined to investigate their embodied carbon mitigation on a more comprehensive level, that is something that we'll certainly take into consideration. And yeah. Kimberly says, I'm working with a historic building that will not be able to do wall-related insulation, especially on the exterior. Hitting the 50% EUI reduction target seems unlikely. Yeah, I think that again, with some of these projects that have extenuating circumstances or specific constraints related to being in a historic building or other, I think it's understood that there can be slight variations. We are looking for teams as we expressed that are trying to really target comprehensive energy reduction. But we can evaluate applications and discuss what the possibilities are. And I think that in this case, for example, if there's difficulty with wall insulation on the exterior, to consider maybe interior measures.
Yeah, Joe, and I would just flag this one as, an application should be very specific about what the historic limitations are, and that sort of all opportunities or potential pathways to providing insulation in particular locations have been explored. We were actually quite concerned about the operating cost implications of especially electrifying buildings that don't have comprehensive insulation and air sealing. So we would want to see that the project team has done sort of any and all analysis to make sure that it is not allowed in any sort of way from a historic tax credit perspective, for example, if that's what the limitation is, and very careful analysis around what operating cost implications may be for any other mechanical systems upgrades that are being done. So I would flag this as, a situation that would need to be handled very carefully.
Thank you, Lauren. Michael asks if a project has already received a grant for decarbonization from Mass DOER but still has a funding gap, could it still be eligible for funding here? Yes, it could be. Um, Tim asks, are zero overtime projects expected to also be shovel ready, or can they still be in planning phases and not have their scoring suffer? Yeah, so I think that we touched a little bit on the fact that we're trying to the Climate Ready Housing Program is trying to acknowledge projects that are at different stages in their planning. That applies to both deep energy retrofits as well as zero overtime projects.
I can jump in here, Joe, just to provide
Yeah,
a
go
little
ahead.
bit more too. I do think for COT projects, what we are looking for is for project teams to have the full COT plan in place for us to look at the phased measures that they're proposing in the long term. Versus in the short term, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of immediate shovel-ready projects or interventions that they're looking to do in the near term. So we are just like in our application review, looking for the full plan in place for the project to achieve zero carbon emissions by 2050.
Thanks for that, Deepti. This question's already been answered. As we're coming up on time, I think we're gonna take a few more of these questions. But if we haven't gotten to any of these, you can reach out to me. My email is up on the screen, and we can discuss any other questions that come up. Take a few more here, one or two more. Given the high cost of implementing a DER program, what is the time frame for use of the funds? For example, if funding is awarded but is not enough to complete the project, other subsidy will need to be included. Yeah, so I think this gets back to projects that are applying in different stages of their pre-development or of their planning. Um, we have historically had flexibility on the time frame for usage of the funds. Ideally, we look for projects to be able to be ready to use the funds within a relatively short span of time. But given the fact that certain projects may need additional subsidy, that we have the flexibility to extend funding awards to a later date.
Yeah, Joe, I can build on that and just say that the awards for this program, the award letters are good for a year. But then at that point, you get into the process that Joe was just talking about, which is extension. And generally, those extensions are granted, especially if projects are showing progress towards their goal. But if a particular project, for example, were to stall out, there is the chance that an extension may not be awarded.
Right. Thank you, Lauren. I think we'll end with this question, as I think it's one that's worth discussing, which is, can you provide an example of what an ideal zero overtime application will look like? I'd like to understand the timeline we would need to show for implementing energy reduction measures, as well as acceptable end of life for fossil fuel appliances, and if replacement plans are required. Yeah, here I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but Deepti, maybe if you wanted to reshare the example that you gave earlier, and maybe we can build on that with the team on some other possible ways that teams might approach the zero overtime path.
Yeah, absolutely. So as shared before, I think so the ideal COT candidate is kind of tying in decarbonization strategies to the building's maintenance life cycle. So we are looking to see the phased out intervention strategies. So if there's, a potential roof replacement 20 years down the line, we do want to see the roof be high performance roof and potentially be solar ready. If there's phase out of mechanical systems, we do want to see a high performance or electrification of those systems for whenever those systems are meant to be replaced typically. So I'll again kind of share one of the recent awardees that we've given under the ZOT project. They were looking to do insulation improvements and ventilation improvements, and they couldn't really build solar or install solar panels right now, but they did do intervention strategies to make it more solar ready for when they are going to install the panels. So just we just want to see the COT plan cover the full kind of life cycle of the building and to have incorporated decarbonization strategies.
Joe, I have another really great example of a zero overtime project that sort of gets to a question that was asked earlier about potential sort of hybridization of fossil fuel based and electrified heating systems. So it's an example of a project where they needed to do a roof replacement and some siding and trim repairs. The cooling units that were serving apartments were at the end of their useful life and needed to be replaced. But they had a central domestic hot water and heating system that still had some effective useful life on it and actually was high efficiency. And so the sort of short-term project was to implement air source heat pumps that could do cooling for the apartments as well as heating in the most efficient stages. And then when temperatures go very low, reverting to the base, mechanical system for gas-fired heating to really sort of optimize emissions reduction as well as operating cost implications. And then that team had a plan over time for implementation and removal of that fossil fuel-based heating system when it hit the end of its effective useful life, fully electrifying the heating, cooling, and domestic hot water for the building, and then implementing renewable energy at that point to offset any incremental operating costs associated with that. So, really looking very closely at how interventions you might be making on your project from a capital needs perspective can be leveraged to really achieve energy and emissions reductions and indoor air quality improvements. And then thinking about that into the future and showing a really thoughtful plan around implementation of those future measures.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Unfortunately, we have, fortunately, not unfortunately, we have so many questions. So we cannot get up to all of them today, but we will have them all and try to address them, and we'll upload an update to the frequently asked questions document that we have on the webpage. So yeah, with that, I think I'm going to close and thank everybody for attending. Thank you all for your interest. Again, we will be posting these slides and this recording. Yeah, we hope to have many of you apply, and just feel free to reach out with any questions that you may continue to have. Have a good rest of your day.